Hi, welcome to Lean Blog Interviews. I'm your host, Mark Graban. Our guest today is Jim Morgan. He is a returning guest. It's been a while. He was here in episode 109, 14-ish years ago in 2011, but it's great to reconnect here. Jim is a senior advisor at the Lean Enterprise Institute. He's a board member at Adrian Steel. He's also been the chief operating officer at Rivian, a pretty high-profile electric vehicle manufacturer. I see their pickup trucks and SUVs out on the road even more often as time goes on. Before that, Jim spent a little over 10 years at Ford Motor Company. He began by leading the development of the global product development system. And before I tell you more, Jim, welcome back to the show. How are you doing?
I'm doing great, Mark, and thanks for inviting me. Been looking forward to this conversation. It's been too long since we've had a chance to catch up.
Yeah, I'm glad we can do that. I encourage people, if they want to go to leanblog.org/109. I believe that conversation was a pretty deep dive into the idea of a product development system and how that's different than a production system. So I invite people to check that out. Jim served the last 9 years at Ford as Director of Global Body and SBU Engineering and Tooling Operations. I'll do an acronym check. I feel like I know auto industry acronyms. What's SBU?
Stamping Business Unit.
Stamping Business Unit.
It's really the stamping side of the business.
All right. Jim and his team contributed to what was, I think, fairly described as a historic product-led revitalization under then CEO Alan Mulally. Before Ford, Jim served as vice president of operations at Troy Design and Manufacturing, a tier 1 global automotive supplier. Jim has a PhD in engineering from the University of Michigan, where his original research into product development won 2 Shingo Prizes for research excellence. And he also co-authored with Professor Jeff Leiker, who's been a guest on this podcast many times, also from the University of Michigan, the award-winning books, The Toyota Product Development System in 2006 and Designing the Future 2018. And I'll encourage people who are interested in all of those topics. Look in the show notes. We'll talk about this later. Please subscribe to the Lean Enterprise Institute LEI Design Brief newsletter that Jim and others contribute to. So Jim, there's a lot to catch up on. You've done a lot of interesting things since we last spoke. Since that time, if I have a standard question, I like to ask people their Lean origin story. I'm pretty certain I didn't ask you that. When, where, how, why did you get introduced to Lean?
Yeah, that's a great question. It's been a long time too.
Yeah.
So I think my first exposure, like many people, was reading the book, The Machine That Changed the World. Mm-hmm. And shortly after that, I decided to go back to graduate school. I had been in industry for a while, decided to go back to graduate school, and I ran smack into Jeff Leiker, John Shook, Mike Rother, Jim Womack, mm-hmm. and all these other sort of lean crazies at the time. This would be the, I guess, mid to late 90s. Yeah. And I was interested in doing some research on the Toyota product development system, the Toyota production system. And it was actually John Shook who said, Jim, it might be interesting to look further upstream, to look at how their development process helps to enable manufacturing, right? How that is key to, how design is key to enabling what they're able to do in TPS. And so I started on that journey that led to, a little bit over a 3-year study into Toyota product development. And I did uncover a strong connection to manufacturing, but a whole lot more. And that started this LPPD journey I've been on for, I don't know how many years now.
Yeah. So LPPD, Lean Product and Process Development.
That's correct.
Yep. The right sequence there?
Yep.
Yeah. And I mean, does, kind of recap, for anyone who's new to that. And again, there's a deep dive in the older episode. Does that connect to ideas like design for manufacturing, design for assembly, trying to better integrate the idea of designing something that is producible, getting more collaboration across those functions?
For sure, that's a big part of it. It's one of the key principles is it's a team sport. It's about engaging the enterprise in product development, including manufacturing, services, logistics. Getting everybody engaged in creating the best possible product for your customer, whether that's a car, an airplane, or a service that you're providing, by engaging all of the stakeholders, and right from the beginning, it creates a big advantage. But it all starts with understanding your customer and how all those team members can contribute to the value that you're creating for your customer.
Yeah. I mean, you were at Ford a long time. My dad was an electrical engineer at GM for 40 years. So different part of the value stream. He was not in factories, but more product development or service engineering. Once vehicles are out in the market and need diagnostics and such. But, one vehicle we've talked about a lot over time and people pick on it is the old Pontiac Aztec.
Yeah.
And it would be on a lot of people's top 5 ugliest vehicles lists. But, my dad would remind me, I guess there's a history around the Aztec, is that the original concepts looked a lot better. But then as Bob Lutz, who's been a guest on this podcast, would say, the bean counters got involved and there were costs, or there were some manufacturing considerations, and it somehow ended up, I guess, kind of uglified. But there's always risk with the vehicle, going from the original clay and the concept cars to real production, right?
Yeah, probably not my favorite vehicle. Although my wife, who retired from GM, I was at Ford, she was at GM, she loves that car. But that actually points out one of the key lessons in effective product development is absolutely you have to make it manufacturable, right? You need to be able to build this product with consistent quality. That's part of the value proposition for your customer. However, that being said, it's also our responsibility to create a product with a high degree of fidelity for the designer's vision that they had for that product. And therein lies the challenge, right? So we can do really boring products and manufacture the hell out of them. But if they're not appealing to customers, then what's the point, right? And so that's always the challenge.
And, as much as we, I think, in a lot of ways, rightfully so, put Toyota up on a pedestal, their reputation for the longest time has been, I don't know if you're thinking of them, relatively boring designs, manufactured very well. When Akio Toyoda became CEO, he, I think, being a car guy, as Bob Lutz, I think, again, back to his book Bean Counters and Car Guys. Akio Toyoda, had this vision of like, we need designs that are a little more appealing, beyond just the why do people buy a vehicle? Part of it is reliability and cost and longevity, but it seemed like you can do both.
Absolutely. And I think that speaks to the evolution of Toyota's understanding of their customer. I think they developed and built exactly the right product for their customer. They understood who was buying Toyotas and why they were buying Toyotas. They were reliable, right? They were, always top quality vehicles and really well executed. As tastes changed, as the marketplace changed and customers started looking for more, I think Akio was really responsive to that and helped to sort of guide Toyota in that direction. And I think Toyota has always done a stellar job of listening to their customer. You can see that most recently with their continued focus on hybrid vehicles, right? When Toyota was slower to move towards BEVs, they took a lot of criticism, but they responded, hey, we're listening to our customer. We're trying to understand, what they want, and we're reacting to that. And so obviously time has proven that to be automotive
Yeah. And that's going to continue to evolve, and customer needs will change. And you think, as other automakers have been catching up in reliability, there are a lot of cases where that reliability is table stakes, and now you choose a vehicle that looks more appealing, and so that changes the dynamics. And then, there are some vehicles out there that some people will buy regardless of the reliability track record, and that's not just any single automaker. There's a few of them out there that don't have the greatest quality reputation, but people buy them and sometimes love them anyway. So it goes to show, like, the customer, I mean, it's not a monolith, right?
That's exactly right. Understanding your customer and what represents value to that customer is that's the crucial step, right?
Yeah. So, I think of, part of the evolution and big changes in the auto industry since we talked last. I'd love to hear, how, kind of an origin story about Rivian, how and when and why, and, did you get involved, with that company that was really, fair to say, a startup at that point?
Yeah, for sure. So I had met RJ Scaringe, who was the founder of Rivian, when he was finishing up his graduate school at MIT. And the first time I met him, he said he wanted to start an auto company, which my first question was why, given all the challenges and the relatively low return on investment. But he stuck with that, and I stayed in touch with him a little bit on and off over the years, and they developed some interesting concepts. And shortly after I left Ford, he reached out and invited me over to take a look at what was going on, and asked me if I'd be willing to sort of help them through their sort of next step in evolution, as they went from concepts to developing vehicles that could actually be manufactured. So we had the R1s, the R1T and the R1S, which you already mentioned. And we had an empty plant in Normal, Illinois. And we had a lot of people to recruit. So we brought on board some fantastic people. We helped develop some sort of minimal infrastructure, and of course, gutted the plant and sort of rebuilt it for these new vehicles, which were just fantastic, amazing vehicles.
Yeah. And Normal, Illinois, that was formerly a Mitsubishi.
That's correct. Yeah, it was the old Mitsubishi plant.
Yeah. And it's kind of interesting. I don't know the history of how they ended up locating in Normal, Illinois. It's kind of in the middle of the state. Maybe the point was it was not exactly near most of the existing automotive supply chain centers, but not in the South, like some of the other automakers from Asia and Europe have done.
Yeah, I don't know the Mitsubishi origin story, how they happened to locate there, but it had sat idle for a number of years, and it represented a great opportunity. But in the end, we had to pretty much clear the plant out and start over, because the technology had evolved so far from those days.
Yeah. So if it was I guess you're taking it down to the columns and
exactly right.
Rethinking, but at least having that facility, and then somewhat of a. I'm curious, like we're trying to recruit people. How much of that came from previous company, or convincing others to move there, or finding people who had never worked in automotive?
Yeah, so that's a really good question. It was a little bit of both. Yeah. So I did recruit some of my old team members who had worked with me in the past, but we also brought in people from Tesla, from Toyota, from Apple, from McLaren. In fact, the guy who probably is most responsible for the R1, Mark Vinnels, was from McLaren, and so we were able to draw from a really broad and diverse group of companies, and I think that was both a strength and a challenge. But it was absolutely exciting, and people came to Rivian with such a high level of energy. Right, they were on a mission to electrify vehicles. Right, both because of the performance potential of the vehicles, but also obviously for the environmental benefits, and sort of charting out a unique path forward. And so the energy and the excitement, and really the remarkable innovation of the people that we were able to bring in there was it was a great experience.
Yeah. And the product strategy really stands out where Tesla was doing sedans and crossovers. Rivian, if I remember right, got to market. I mean, they probably saw an opportunity of where the electric pickups. You didn't have the Ford Lightning pickup or other pickups yet. Really didn't have SUVs out yet. Is that right?
That's correct. Yeah. So it was. Again, that was RJ who identified this opportunity. Saw a chance to really combine this idea of adventure and the environment, together with the truck and the SUV, and found a really nice niche.
Yeah. Well, and it's. I mean, that's where the market has gone. I mean, Ford has evolved to really be SUVs, trucks, and the Ford Mustang.
Yep, that's true. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, and GM. I mean, they make a lot of money off of trucks. And is Rivian, from what you know, moving in the direction of, say, crossovers or a sedan, or are they really going to focus on trucks and SUVs?
So they recently announced the R2 and even a sneak peek at the R3, which will be a smaller SUV, more affordable SUV, but highly capable, just like the R1. So I think they're going to continue to, I use the word exploit this niche by
tap into.
Thank you. Tap into. I didn't mean any sort of negative connotations there, but
I know.
And they're beautiful. I watched the reveal, and I'm still in contact with former colleagues and friends there, and so there's a lot of excitement around this next generation of R2 vehicles. So I think Rivian is tapped into something, to use your term, very powerful in a number of different ways, and I think there's more good stuff on the horizon.
Yeah. And then building up, I guess, in size. I mean, I'll tell you, the vehicle I see most often are the new Amazon electric delivery trucks, which that's a Rivian partnership, right?
Absolutely. And that was a great opportunity to apply, a number of different principles and practices around deeply understanding your customer. We wanted to do more than just electrify the Amazon vans. We wanted to understand the driver's perspective, the people in the warehouse, what was critical to the people who are using this product every single day. And we spent a lot of time riding around on delivery vans, working, with loading and unloading and things like that. So we wanted to create something that was better, not just an electric version of what they already had. And that was also a super exciting project. Yeah.
So I bet there's some features that would be, considered pretty clever, or some of these things were like, in hindsight, obvious that hopefully the drivers and the people loading those vehicles all appreciate.
That's exactly right. And the ideas largely came from them, right? If only we had, fill in the blank kind of thing. And our engineers were right there, and we were able to mock up some early things, and they gave us some more feedback on what we mocked up. And it really, I think it helped, further differentiate the product.
Yeah. So during that time, there's, products, and then, the process development. And then it seemed like there would also be a big opportunity for culture development. I don't know if there was, intent to have a Rivian production system, a Rivian product development system, or maybe altogether different language, but I'm curious how much focus there was to build something from scratch.
Yeah. Again, and in terms of the biggest blessing was also the biggest challenge. I talked about the richness that this diverse group of people brought to the organization was absolutely powerful and energizing and all that. But they also came with very unique backgrounds. They had the Tesla way of doing things, or the Toyota way of doing things, or the Apple way of doing things. And because we hadn't fully established our infrastructure yet at Rivian. There was a bit of a void at times, right? In terms of what's the process to do this, or how are we going to communicate that? And so people filled in with what they knew and what they understood. And that wasn't always the same thing, which led to some miscommunication, some misunderstandings. And so we really had to kind of take a step back and think about, we wanted to learn from all these perspectives. We wanted to take that in. But in the end, we wanted to create the Rivian way, right? That was really important, not the Toyota way or the Ford way or the, whatever. And we found ourselves, sort of stopping mid-sentence, right? Whenever somebody would start a sentence with, when I worked at GM, kind of, it's like, no. We, if you have a good idea, let's talk about it in terms of first principles. Let's talk about specific ways of doing things. Let's talk about the why behind that and the first principle level, right? And now we can start to build out the Rivian way of doing things. And again, it was both really exciting and super challenging at the same time, because we were, as they say, to use a cliche, we were building the airplane while we were flying it, right?
Right. And then, I think of core elements of, a lean culture, to use that terminology. I think of things including continuous improvement, engaging and respecting everybody in that topic near and dear to my heart. I'm not going to turn this into an episode of my favorite mistake in that podcast, but, I think, learning from mistakes, preventing mistakes, learning from those that happen. I'm throwing kind of all that into a bucket. How much were principles like that front of mind?
Yeah, absolutely, Mark. And I think that's a great insight that I know you've shared, is that ability to learn from failure, the making it okay, sort of expecting to have issues, right? Because this is tough. This is hard what we're trying to do, right? We're building an auto company. We're building these exceptional products. We're trying to staff up. This is hard. And one of the key differences, I think, at Rivian compared to other places I've worked and other companies I've worked with, is their risk tolerance. RJ was great about that, right? We really embraced risk, which allowed us to experiment. It allowed us to really take a chance, do an experiment. Sometimes they didn't work, but as long as we learned from them and kept going forward, that was the important part. And so I think it became a sort of, rather than a risk averse, a risk embracing kind of culture. And that was, it was freeing. It was, it was sort of, it let us take in a lot of different ideas and try some different things. And sometimes they worked, sometimes they didn't.
Yeah. And I forget if we talked about this before, but, from your time at Ford, and famous Alan Mulally story is coming in and seeing, that the status on everything was green.
Yeah.
And I think the question was something like, well, if all of these are green, why is the company in the red? And, kind of admitting the real reality and being less punitive and more helpful. I mean, did Rivian have more of a culture of saying, look, if it's yellow or if it's red, we're going to not like it, but accept that's the reality and move forward from there? How would you compare?
Yeah, absolutely. What I say all the time is it's okay to be red. It's not okay to stay red.
Yeah.
Again, something that I learned from Mulally and his business plan review. It's all right. We're going to have a problem. That's why we're working together on this, and we're going to solve that problem. We're going to move forward. So it's not okay to not raise problems, and it's also not okay to just let them fester. We want to surface them, and then we want to work to close them out, and creating a culture that would help enable that, would support people in that work, was critical during the Mulally years at Ford, which that was changing a culture. And it also fed into what we wanted to build to begin with at Rivian. And that was RJ's vision as well.
Yeah. And what you said there about, it's okay to be red, what's not okay is staying red, makes me think of ideas around mistakes of, again, like okay might be a loaded phrase in some situations, but I'll say it anyway. It's okay to make mistakes. What's not okay is repeating them.
Right.
And Akio Toyoda has said very similar things, that he wants it to be, or it is in the DNA of Toyota, that mistakes aren't repeated. I mean, and I think when you're doing new things, like there's a difference to me, like thinking about healthcare for just a wildly different parallel. There are relatively routine, repeatable procedures where you'd like to think mistakes are prevented, mistake proofing, checklists, communication. There's a difference between, let's say, what's now a relatively routine knee replacement surgery,
right,
and the first times anybody tried
that's right,
doing that, of being on the frontier of not knowing what you don't know, as opposed to getting into a stage of development where, like, yeah, this is very routine. There's it's just very different scenarios.
Yeah, absolutely. And in fact, I would say at launch, which I know a bit about the auto industry, which is one of the most challenging times, is when you're actually launching a new vehicle. And I would always say we're here to solve problems. I just don't want to make a career out of solving the same problem, right?
Right.
I want to move on to new problems.
Yeah. And I mean, there's always that question of, the speed of the intended ramp up. Like, there may be business pressures, especially if sales and the backlog is strong, to try to ramp up really quickly. But ramping up too quickly can cause, quality problems, or too many problems to be solved all at once. I mean, I think this is at least part of the origin of the idea: go slow to go fast.
Yep.
With a ramp up. What was some of the mindset there about finding the right balance of not too slow, not too fast?
And so I guess that's the secret, right? Is you want to increase your speed to market. That's clearly a competitive advantage. But getting to market with junk isn't a very good recipe for success either.
Right.
And so, being very intentional about how you move forward, building on your experience, right? Those are key to accomplishing that.
Yeah. And I think applicable in so many situations, even outside of manufacturing. So, I think this idea, it's always driven home to me of, when you can, even if, you're doing, process improvement, which might be doing the old thing a very new way. There's a reason that, the PDSA cycles are drawn as iterative, and thinking more of as an experimentalist, of saying, well, we have a hypothesis, let's test the idea on a small scale. So then we're not so wedded to it, we can admit, well, okay, that didn't work, or it didn't work as well as we thought. Let's adjust, let's iterate.
And that's where some of the most valuable learning comes from. I mentioned the research that I did into Toyota. I've been learning from Toyota ever since. I've visited many of their plants, their engineering centers, tooling shops, test centers, and I always come away with really valuable learning. They're an amazing company, but I think the most important lessons I've learned is applying those ideas and adapting those ideas to new environments, doing the experiment, as you suggested, having things not always work out like they should, and learning from that and doing it again, right? And during my time at Ford, that became so prevalent. We developed a bit of, dark humor about it. And we'd say, well, there's another great idea that wasn't worth the shit, kind of. But that was all part of normalizing it, right?
Sure.
Making that part of how we were going to move forward as a team, and including humor, because it's tough work, and building partnerships with the people that you're working with, and sharing those experiences and growing and learning from those. Just it's magic. It's an awesome experience.
Yeah. So let's talk about some of the things that you've been involved in to help share ideas, help organizations collaborate and share and learn from each other. The LEI, Product and Process Development Learning Group of companies. Can you tell us, sort of, how that started, how that works?
Yeah. So it's been a bit of a passion project for me. Jim Womack and John Shook, after I retired. I've done this, I've retired multiple times. And they asked me to join LEI and start a product and process development initiative there. And one of the things that I said initially was, I don't want to be a consultant. That is, I don't want to be a consultant in the mold of some of the consultants that I had worked with when I was in industry, because I didn't think it was a very effective partnership.
Yeah.
And that isn't a hit against those people who were in those roles. It was more the model that wasn't working for me. And so I wanted to develop a new model for how we could work with companies and how we could help them. I didn't want to converge with an army of people, find everything wrong, and sort of leave them with a white binder and say good luck, kind of thing. Right. I wanted to really engage as partners with them. And to their credit, Jim and John both said, "Hey, do whatever you want, right? Let's, if you have a different way of thinking about this, let's try it." Yeah. And so, along with my first two initial partners, which was GE Appliance and Herman Miller, which is now Miller Knoll, we sort of co-developed this learning partner model where they would both learn from their coach, which was me at the time, and learn from each other. They would host each other at visits and share what they had been working on, and help each other to learn and to grow. And we just sort of set up two basic rules. We said, okay, we don't want any competitors here, because we want people to be able to share warts and all, everything that's going on, right? Because that's what it, back to your point about learning from mistakes. We wanted to be able to share mistakes and say, there's another great idea that wasn't worth a shit, right? And develop that same kind of camaraderie across these companies. And so two turned into four, turned into six, from various different industries, but we kept roughly the same model. We had to add some excellent coaches that could work with each company, and we continued to bring them together. Each company would host a meeting. We'd do it a couple times a year, and everybody would share what they'd been working on, and we would tour the companies, and so it was sort of just this learning group of companies where we were thought partners with the companies, as opposed to directing them on exactly what they should be doing, and that has worked out really well. Some of those original partners are still with us, and we've added people from all different industries. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, that reminds me of initiative I was involved with at the beginning. It was about 15 years ago and still ongoing. Collaboration, especially when it got started between LEI and what's now called Catalysis.
Absolutely.
Formerly Theta Care Center for Healthcare Value, of a healthcare value network of organizations visiting each other, learning, sharing, and I think building trust to be able to realize we can share foibles or failures and not get laughed out of the room, because everyone else realizes, this stuff is hard, and we can learn from our failures instead of just sitting around and patting each other on the back for the shit that was worth a shit.
That's exactly right. And so, that's a little bit what you run into at conferences. Conferences are great, but companies that are presenting there are a bit restricted in what they can share, and because they're it impacts the company's reputation and all that kind of stuff. And so, and you don't know if there's competitors, blah blah blah. So this creates a very different environment where people can learn. The other thing I think that's unique, Mark, is we start with a diagnostic. So we don't have a one size fits all. It's back to that first principles lesson that I learned at Ford and then relearned at Rivian. These environments are unique. And so while the same principles apply, the way they manifest themselves could be different. And so we want to first understand where they're at. right? And so we start with a diagnostic, similar to what you are familiar with in the healthcare. Doctors don't prescribe, or at least good ones, don't prescribe until they've done a diagnosis.
Right.
And so we wanted to take the same approach. We wanted to understand exactly where the company was, and then build a plan that was unique to them, and then share their progress, and consult their coach, and have a resource that they could lean on. But again, it was always started with understanding what problem we're trying to solve, as opposed to force fitting some template on a company.
Right. So many familiar concepts and ideas there, and what you're describing. Thinking back to Rivian, you weren't trying to just electrify the big white binder.
That's exactly right. Well done. Yep.
What have you learned personally, Jim, from your involvement here, of seeing what other companies doing that, kind of advancing product and process development?
Yeah, it's clear that I have learned as much from our partners as they have ever learned from me. The way they've applied some of these concepts and ideas have been incredibly creative, and I learn every time I engage with them, because they know their industry, they know their customer, they know their challenges, right? If you just give them sort of a framework to operate within, the best companies, boy, just watch them go. And so I've learned, again, every time I engage with them, but I've learned also the application of these ideas across a number of different industries. So, for example, we worked quite a bit, a couple, 3 years with Michigan Medicine, and we applied product development concepts to the development of new clinical processes. Through a specialized group there that was led by a gentleman named Paul Paliani. And they just did an incredible job of thinking about how these principles could apply to the way they develop new clinical processes. And so they would start with a study period, right? They would deeply understand the customer and the context. They would engage with all the stakeholders, the docs, the nurses, the IT folks, the patients, whoever needed to be engaged with, and they would engage with them right from the start. And then as they matured their ideas around the processes, they would actually set up design reviews, just like you do in product development, and they would sort of examine it in great detail to understand the potential failure modes and things like that. Then they would pilot it. They would experiment with it, and learn from those experiments. They would actually orchestrate their launch of the process, so everybody would be engaged with launching the new process. It was fantastic to watch them work.
Yeah. Well, I mean, that sort of intentional ramp up, I'm sure, would be so much more effective than throwing everyone into the building and say, you got all the rooms and the equipment and the space, and good luck, figure it out.
That's exactly right. And then they did ongoing, as part of that ramp up, they did ongoing check-ins with the people who took ownership of that process then. And they've done just some fantastic things there, and they continue to.
Yeah. And Michigan Medicine, for those who don't know, that's the University of Michigan.
That's right.
There in Ann Arbor. Because, there's, I've seen varying degrees of, let's say, the word integrated gets thrown around. We've got this new integrated cancer center, and I'm not speaking about Michigan Medicine or anybody in particular, but there's quote unquote integrated, meaning, okay, we've got everyone in the same building. And then there's maybe a different level of integrated. So I can think of like one example, even though it was in the same building, patients coming in for their oncologist and then chemotherapy treatment. And like, there were literally like separate lines to stand in and register. And like, if this is an integrated cancer center, it seems like you shouldn't have to register and announce your appearance multiple times, as opposed to, there was a great example in Minnesota, Park Nicollet Hospital, where, it seemed much more integrated from a design intent. They had a design intent that became a marketing message of where care comes to you. And yes, it was all now in the same building, but I think everything other than radiation treatment or something that required very big, expensive equipment, like all of the different functions and practitioners came to the patient. And like there's a different level of process design to make that happen. It seems like that would be a much better experience.
Absolutely. And I am a cancer survivor. I was treated for my cancer at Michigan Medicine by just a phenomenal team of professionals. And I will be obviously forever grateful to the team for what they did for me. However, that being said, I found big gaps in communication across the various treatment regimens, whether it was radiation or surgery or whatever it happened to be. And it can be a bit overwhelming for the patient that's going through that, who's also having to deal with their diagnosis and sort of whatever physical manifestations there are from that. It can be a real problem. And that experience motivated me to join a patient advisory board at Michigan Medicine. And that's when I got engaged with them and, did what I could to give back and to contribute to help improve the experiences of patients going forward. And that was a bit the genesis of this engagement with Michigan Medicine and, some of the work that we were able to help them do there. Yeah.
Well, that's great that they are actively and again, I think intentionally engaging patients in that process of realizing things can be better, and especially in a fast-changing clinical landscape, new clinical innovations often require process innovations. And again, it seems like you can do both of being the automaker that has great products that are also manufacturable. Great product, great process is not a trade-off any more than great clinical care. Excuse me, that great clinical care would be somehow a trade-off with great care processes and care experiences.
Yeah, I would do it. I agree. I think you not only can, you have to do them all. Right. You have to do them both. And that needs to be our goal.
So I wish we had done an episode together after your book "Designing the Future" came out. That was probably that was probably my fault. I probably should have reached out. Give us kind of a quick summary of that book again. Jeff Leiker, your partner on that, for kind of who's the target audience for that book.
Yeah, thanks for bringing it up. So it was, Jeff and I had written the Toyota product development system back in, I don't know if that came out in 2006 or something like that. And where we explained the fundamental differences in the product development systems between Toyota and some of their competitors. Yeah. The reason we decided to write Designing the Future was twofold. One was actually captured in the title, and that's the fact that we wanted to make organizations aware that when they did product development, they were literally designing their future, right? They were determining, much of the success they were going to have going forward because they were creating the key processes, the products, they were, how they were going to work with their customers going forward. And the second reason that we decided to write it is we wanted to share that these ideas, these principles and practices had been embraced by a broad range of industries, everything from aerospace to, other automakers, to Michigan Medicine, to, subsea oil and gas exploration. I mean, and they were successful. And so we wanted to write about those success stories and share with people some ideas that might get them started on that path.
Yeah. Are there also software companies that have been involved? Because it seems like what I hear about in software circles or agile, or they'll talk about adaptations of the Toyota production system, and I'm like, with all due respect, it sounds like software is more of product development. I mean, we say software development. Are there opportunities to learn from the Toyota production or the Toyota product development system in software?
Yeah, so absolutely. And that's a great segue into some of the work that we're doing right now. So one of the, I think, big challenges in product development today is the integration of hardware and software development. Increasingly, software is responsible for the overall customer experience, and you have to get that right. If you think about vehicles when I started in this business compared to vehicles now, especially at a company like Rivian, where everything is driven from software, right? Even simple electromechanical devices like opening the frunk or, the lift gate, it all comes from software. And so we need to get much better at integrating how they're developed. However, there's a lot of challenges with that, right? The clock speed to begin with doesn't necessarily match, testing requirements, on and on and on. And so,
and by clock speed, you mean like the rate at which, let's say, mechanical design evolves versus
that's exactly right.
The speed of software.
Right. Okay. And so we've actually begun working through the design brief, and it'll be we've already had some. We're going to have a whole bunch more. We've been working with some Agile experts, literally some people that were the original signers of the Agile Manifesto. We've worked with one of the original guys from Extreme Programming, and we've started to engage with them because they've also seen these shortcomings. So we're starting to talk about how do these practices of Agile and Lean are not so far apart. They really aren't. And if you can sort of get away from a sort of, dogmatic kind of approach to these disciplines and start to think first principles again, you can bring these things together. And we've started those conversations and already gained some incredible insights, like from guys like Pierre Masai, who was the CIO for Toyota in Europe, is part of that group. Brice Bernard, who was a co-founder of Theodo, which is a software company.
He's been a guest on the podcast here with Catherine Chabaron. They were on an episode together.
Also, one of our contributors, Robert Martin, who was one of the original signatories, who's been on a kind of crusade to improve software craftsmanship and help this integration. So this is sort of what we're up to our eyeballs in right now, is trying to bring these approaches together so that we can have better integrated products, right? Better value for our customers.
And I'll put a link in the show notes. People can go to the LEI website, lean.org, to sign up for that design brief. I'm on the broader LEI email list, and there are mentions and links to design brief articles in there. But I'll encourage people go and check that out. One other thing I wanted to touch on, maybe before we wrap up, is what it's like being on a board. So Adrian Steel, I'm going to guess, Adrian, Michigan?
It is, yep.
Okay. So I know of Adrian growing up in Michigan. And I'd be curious to hear a little bit about Adrian Steel. How was it you got to be on the board, and what that means in terms of bringing your experiences, or kind of what it means to be a board member as opposed to a operating executive?
Very different experience, and another huge learning opportunity for me. Once again, I am learning more than I could possibly teach them. I was invited to join by one of the founding family members, and I joined John Shook on the board. Adrian does conversions of vans and pickup trucks into work vehicles. They do large scale conversions, like let's say for Consumers Power or Edison, or these large fleet vans. They also do some individual stuff, but their sort of claim to fame are the large fleets. It's a nationwide company, and just really has a fantastic culture. It's such a great place to be engaged with. Again, these family values from a relatively small town in Adrian, and now they've kind of grown up to be a very large and very successful company. And I'm still in my sort of rookie stages of figuring out how to influence the company from a really unique position, right? So you can be sort of, in the work or, leading the work from the inside. You can be an advisor and now sort of a completely different role, as a board member. But they have embraced lean thinking for many years. So it's a very natural fit for me. They're evolving into a more engineering-driven, innovation-driven company than they had been in the past. So obviously, again, good fit with my experience. And there's just a fantastic team to work with out there. So it's, I'm really enjoying it.
Well, good. And John Shook was on, or is he still on the board at Rivian, or he was?
He was on the board at Rivian, and I think he got off the board, I don't know, a couple, 3 years ago, something like that.
Okay. But I'm sure you can get coaching from John about being a board member and what he's learned. And
absolutely. Yeah, I've learned from John since my first days at Michigan in the engineering school. He was actually just leaving Toyota and transitioning to a new life outside of Toyota. When I ran into him, he was, I think, a lecturer or something. And that was the first time. And I've learned from John ever since.
Yeah. Well, Jim, this has been great. I'm curious what's next for you? What are we going to talk about in a future episode? Less than 14 years from now. That's a big oversight on my part, not having you back sooner.
And mine as well, Mark. I've also watched how you've progressed over the years, and been really impressed with all the things that you've accomplished. And I hope that we don't go nearly so long in catching up again. So a couple of things. We're going to continue to strengthen this collaboration with the Agile community. We're going to continue to grow this combined community through the design brief. So far, so good. We're trying to bring new voices in, like Fabrice, like Catherine, you mentioned, and a number of different people who have contributed and will continue to contribute. I think also we are in sort of the beginning stages of building a collaboration with Ben Armstrong, who's the executive director at MIT's Center for Manufacturing Performance. We've found some common ground with them, and I think we'll be starting some projects together, which I'm really excited about. They're doing some great work there, sort of leading this manufacturing renaissance in the U.S. right now. And we've begun to look at, again, what role does product and process development capability have on that, including everything from the design and engineering to, tool making and fixture building and all that kind of capability that goes into great manufacturing. And so it's a perfect spot for us to continue to collaborate and contribute. Yeah.
Well, look forward to hearing more from you, crossing paths at LEI events and otherwise. So again, we've been joined, Jim Morgan. I invite you to, again, go back and check out episode 109 at leanblog.org. I tried turning it into something Irish, leanoblog. leanblog.org/109. And again, check out the show notes for links to Jim's books and everything he is working on. So again, thank you. Great seeing you, Jim. Thanks for sharing what you've been up to and what you're learning.
Great to see you as well, Mark. It's been fun.